Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another product review. This time, I'm taking a look at actually a couple offerings. One of them I'm actually going to go into a bit of depth on. The other two I'm going to touch on simply because they're related products. The key one is Quantum Starfarer. It is from Stellagama Publishing, author Omer Golan Joel. They have sent me, along with Rich Hazelwood, they have sent me a review copy. We're kind enough to do so. And you will note that it says on the title that it is the Quantum Engine. And that actually kind of threw me off a little bit because I have reviewed things from them before, and they've all been the Cepheus engine, but they've been stripped down versions. As you can see, Barbaric uses the Cepheus engine, Cepheus Atomic uses the Cepheus engine, and what this is this Quantum Engine is basically an evolution, and it's to separate these small miniature books from the more full-fledged role-playing games that they produce, and also because as you go through their products, some of their products, such as Cepheus Light, things like that, are based on the Cepheus engine, but they're stripped down to more give an OSR-style feel. Well, these smaller books take that one step further, and they're very, very much digest sized, meant to just jump in and play. They're still somewhat compatible with things made with the Cepheus engine. You can generally run those things with these sorts of books. However, they're really designed for a far more streamlined play experience. Now, I have mentioned both Barbaric and Cepheus Atom in the past, but this reminded me that I never actually broke down and did a proper in-depth review on them. Now, this is going to go along my off-the-cuff style of reviews rather than my super in-depth reviews. I have read all of these, but rather than do a really hard scripted review, I think I'm just going to go ahead and do a flip-through and cover it there. So let's go ahead and look at the contents first. And as I said, we'll focus on Quantum Starfarer. Quantum Starfarer is a sci-fi role-playing game based on a very stripped-down version of the Cepheus engine, now redubbed the Quantum Engine. Goes with basically a starfaring space opera style sort of gameplay. You've got the basic game mechanic, which is the same as it has been in many Cepheus engines. You've got 2d6 plus a skill modifier versus difficulty numbers, and they're listed here in a table in the front. Character generation in this one uses 7 skills. How that differs from the normal Cepheus engine stuff is simply that in each of these books, those skills are customized for the particular genre. For instance, the Barbaric one, which is more of a fantasy gaming one, also has 7 skills, but they are different. For instance, you've got combat, knowledge, physical, social, space, and stealth for the Quantum Starfarer one, whereas in the Barbaric one you have combat, craft, lore, physical, social, sorcery, and stealth, because of course there are no spaceships in a fantasy setting, at least most fantasy settings. This material here does say that it is based on the Barbaric rule set. I think it explicitly states that. Yeah, here we go. A lighter sword and sorcery rule set Barbaric in 2021, but they state a little later in here that it is explicitly based on the Barbaric set. And in fact, when you skip to the advancement section, and I'll get into this in a moment, it literally was just copy-pasted to represent this. Barbaric offers an experience system, and they simply forgot to change the name of it. However, most of the sci-fi stuff is, in fact, meant for sci-fi. It does have point buy, and basically you get a set number of points and assign them to all of the skills with a maximum of 3 skills to level per skill. 3 points in a particular skill to start with. Your stamina and your lifeblood, which are basically your quick healing hit points, and then your critical hit points. They're not rolled as they were in earlier versions of this particular light rule set. They are based on just a numeric value now. You get to choose one trait which functions as sort of your class definition / feat, and then you get a set number of credits to start with. So then it gives a list of some very basic traits. You've got each of these traits gives you a very minor bonus or something with advantage to roll. Advantage works in a similar method to advantage in D20 systems, except since this uses a 2d6 resolution system, you simply re-roll one of the d6s and then take the highest. But the traits are very limited because this is, of course, a limited scope game. You've got Ace, gives you bonus to gain edge in vehicle combat. It's things like Ghost, which gives you advantage on sneaks and darkness. Mr. Fix-It gives you advantage on throws to repair vehicles and such. There are a few of them that give specific bonuses. As you can see, Martial Artist gives you 2d6 damage with your unarmed attacks. Psionic gives you 2 sonic powers. But they generally follow a very sort of basic feel. And there's a very, very few of them. However, their basic structure does let you, if you end up using this game for a very long campaign or something, you can always develop more based on the same template. Again, you've got Psionics. The Psionics are usable pretty much once a day, but after that you have to make a knowledge roll in order to preserve it, similar to casting a spell in the Barbaric system. Each of these is a very, very broad operation. For instance, Choke is basically force choke. You can grab a humanoid by the throat for X number of combat rounds or until you release the target, and it does paralysis plus d6 per round. You've got healing, you've got mind blast, but these are very broad and yet very, very easily educated psionic abilities. Personnel combat, it functions similar to Cepheus engine material. You basically throw a combat roll to hit. You've got some modifiers versus range. It does have some special, like weapon-specific rules for just shotguns, grenades, that sort of thing. But that's to be expected in a modern or a futuristic style setting. But as I said before, you've got stamina and lifeblood. Your stamina is deducted first, and then once your stamina's out, you start taking lifeblood. Stamina heals relatively quickly, whereas lifeblood actually can kill you, and very quickly if you start accruing wounds. In fact, you've got a minor wound system, wherein if your stamina runs out, you get a minor wound, you take a penalty to further actions, and then if you take a serious wound when more than half of your lifeblood is out, that takes you out of combat, and then you can die if lifeblood runs out. Serious wounds generally require medical attention in order to alleviate. Vehicle combat. Vehicle combat and later on the Starship combat are both very similar. They're a sort of a chase. You basically make opposed rolls modified by your vehicle, and then whoever wins the roll is considered the one with the edge, and you get a bonus to hit. Whereas if you don't have position, basically, which is what they call it in there, then you take a penalty to hit. Rather than a pure hit points damage, you roll on a table every time you actually make a hit, and it tells you what systems are damaged depending on the type of weapon used and the amount that the vehicle is armed. It was very, very abstract. Pretty much all you need, though, for that sort of quick resolution combat. You've got a basic advancement system where you get 1 experience per adventure, then every 5 experience you get a rank. When they gain a new rank, they may choose one of the following. You get a new trait, some lifeblood or stamina, or a skill point. I should note that since it is taken from the Barbaric system, it does mention up to 4 times in rank, up to legend, because the name is taken from the Barbaric system, but there's no name for ranks in Quantum Starfarer. It's again a casualty of some cut and paste rules, but they're very few and far between in here. You've got a hero point system, which lets you, gives you a little bit of flexibility in a game session. I believe this is also strongly influenced from the Barbaric system and other sword and sorcery style stuff, just to give you a more heroic feel to things. You've got your basic Starship Design, which is a very, very stripped down sort of rule set, similar to the ones in Cepheus Lite and Cepheus Deluxe, but as you can see, very, very simple. You just select a chassis, you add your systems in there, and then you can figure out a very basic spaceship from that. You do have to accrue for keeping your crew and life support and such in there. But as you can see, it's only a few pages long, and they do give you some sample starships, just in case you don't feel like making yours from scratch during a particular game. You got rules for star travel, and they're very, very abstracted. You basically have set number of hours taken to travel within a system, set number of, I believe, days based, or actually it may be, is it, I think it's just a flat week travel between star systems. Let me take a look. Yeah, it's basically a flat week to travel between systems, no matter how far apart they are, so long as you can reach it with the particular jump drive that you have. Space combat's gone into, and again, you basically have position to determine who gets advantage on or who gets a bonus on a particular attack, and then again you have your weapon categories versus armor categories. There's less of them for spaceships, so there's that involved, and then you roll on a table and apply the effect based on each hit. You do have some particular combat rules for space, because it is an all-hands-on-deck situation. You've got the ability to do emergency repairs, and you do have the ability to try to target particular components on an enemy ship in case you don't want to kill it outright, but you just want to slow them down. They have a very, very basic starship mapping, including a sample hex system that shows how to map out a sector, although there are some random tables here, but there's not a full star system generation sort of rule set. You may see those in other systems, but at least it's got the framework of one. It doesn't have the full star generation. Lets you produce trade codes for various worlds to let you know what kind of world it is, what kind of technology it has, and it uses a very similar technology level to what you've seen in other Cepheus engine material. You've got various world tags, but there are no description of those tags in the book. So those tags are for your own reference, or if you have a more in-depth system, I guess you can go ahead and take a look at it. But these tags are basically inspirational in this particular system. Got a sample world entry right there that lets you determine what, how a world entry is supposed to look. You got lists of equipment following each melee weapon, or each weapon in general has your damage, your range, and then what tech level to find it on, as well as a cost. It's very, very simply added to the combat system from before for personal combat. You've got your basic living expenses. You've got salaries, because you will, if you have a star trip, have to pay a lot of people to make the thing run. You've got your pharmaceuticals rules, as well as exploration equipment. It gives a very brief description of what each equipment part will be used for in an adventure, just in case you didn't know, as well as specific rules for particular ones. For instance, your backpack in the abstract encumbrance system will go ahead and let you carry 4 more points worth of material. The encumbrance system in this is very, very straightforward. Basic costs for vehicles, as well as what tech they require, and a brief description of each vehicle in question. The game finishes with the open game license, which is based on the Wizard of the Coast SRD of all things, even though it is a Cepheus engine thing. Although I believe they have like a Cepheus engine SRD as well. So I don't know, maybe it's just me. I haven't really taken a look at the SRD for Cepheus, but it may just be an extension of the Wizard of the Coast one. Wow, okay. Anyway, as you can see, there are very, very limited illustrations in this book, but where they appear, they're pretty classic. I mean, this is not a booklet, really, that you get for something that's outstanding looking. This is the sort of system that you get in order to stuff into your pocket to play very quickly during like a one-nighter, during a con, or any other minor gathering. This can be upgraded with some serious work to another Cepheus engine thing, but it's very much a quick play kind of game. I think it's well written in terms of just the mechanics of it. I think that it's straightforward. It is easy to learn, and if you are familiar with the Cepheus system, you may find it a little bit too simplified in areas, but that's what it's for. It's for quick play, quick resolution, quick learning. You go in there with maybe 4 or 5 people that have never played Cepheus Engine before. You just quickly play it, and then you go on your way afterwards. In that, it does the job very well. I didn't notice, aside from the cut-paste errors, any major typos or anything in it. It's remarkably well edited, but then again, I've come to appreciate that about Stellagama Publishing's material. They may not be the most flowery of prose in their booklets or their full-on RPG systems, as I've reviewed some of those, but they get the job done. They've got almost like an engineer's kind of eye towards explaining the rules succinctly and then just getting out of the way so you can do it. There are no examples in this book. That is something I miss from other Stellagama works, because they're usually full of examples, but again, this is just your very minor kind of pocketbook. Now I'm going to go briefly into Barbaric and Cepheus Atom. These are 2 earlier offerings that use a very similar system, and if you go through them, you will find that the iteration was not quite as simplified as it appears in Quantum Starfarer. They still have some holdouts from Cepheus engine material. Barbaric is a sword and sorcery style setting book, whereas Cepheus Atom is kind of your post-apocalyptic book. Now, I have touched on these in other reviews before, and they've been sitting on my desk waiting for me to get a full video on them. I just haven't got to it prior to this. Barbaric, you've got a very similar system up front. Same resolution mechanics, your 2D plus your skill versus difficulty ratings. Here you've got your 7 skills. Again, they replace space with sorcery because it's a sword and sorcery type material. It says right up the bat, they have replaced Psionics with sorcery in this one. So if you have a sorcery skill, you gain 2 spells of your choice. You've got rules for non-humans, and they are kind of very generic sword and sorcery stuff. You've got some Tolkienish stuff like dwarves and elves, but that you also have some things that you might see in more like Appendix N material, like the Anunnaki or the Ape folk, or even some lizard folk that might appear in more dark sword and sorcery material. You've got a very much longer list of traits, and this is largely because as it is based on a sword and sorcery style setting, you really kind of want to identify classes, and whereas in a space-based your space opera-based game, you may have a more homogeneous group of adventurers that are more defined by their skills. In a heroic setting, you're more defined by your special abilities, and this lets you fill out your standard classes with the traits. It does have combat moves. Because this is a sword and sorcery material, you're not going to spend a lot of time in corridors shooting each other with blasters. You've got a more heroic, cinematic style combat, and it uses these particular skills, not only just basic weapon skills like giving you proficiency in skills, but also giving you special moves like shield bashing and disarming based on your combat skill. So if you are a relatively low combat character, like a sorcerer or a rogue, or even a rogue might have some decent combat skills. But if you're like a sorcerer or a priestess or something, you're probably going to be limited to very basic combat skills. Whereas if you're someone like Conan or something, you're going to have you're going to be able to cut through crowds in a whirlwind, that sort of thing. And then we go in, and it basically helps balance against the sorcery of the system. We've got your experience, and here you see the ranks are explained rather than Quantum Starfarer, where since it's cut and paste from Barbaric, it simply left those references in. This one actually tells you the rank. Why you would need the rank, really, I don't know, because they don't really do anything except offer a name for quick reference. So instead of rank 3, you're a master or something. It gives you the same advancement system, either a new trait, new endurance or lifeblood, or a new skill. But then you've got advancement for rapid advancement for if you want to run a broader campaign in a shorter time. Again, these are made for very short periods of time, like at a con or maybe over the weekend or something. So you can run an entire campaign and gain experience per session, and you can probably clear like 3 or 4 sessions over, or maybe 4 or 5 sessions over the course of a con or something, and you would be able to advance at that point. Got your hero point system just like before, lets you reroll damage, force a reroll, etc., etc. You've got your equipment list, and since it is a sword and sorcery based setting, you very much have that sort of feel in terms of the equipment rather than sci-fi stuff. You've got things like dogs and lanterns and things like that. You do have the basic encumbrance system, which I believe was in Quantum Starfarer before, but I just skimmed over it. Very, very abstract. You can carry a certain number of items, and certain items or a certain number of items based on your endurance. So the more endurance you have, the more items you can carry along. You do have a more in-depth melee a more in-depth combat system, because you spend more in melee, and because you're more apt to be in the thick of it, hand to hand. They do have a little bit more leeway in that for more heroic cinematic combat. You've got both surprise and initiative, which I believe was settled in Quantum Starfarer a certain way with a skill check. But you've also got like a frenzy that lets you basically cleave through enemies. It gives you the same healing rules as before, but it also gives you basic morale rules, because you're more likely to make things run away in a heroic fantasy thing rather than blast them all until everybody's dropped. You do have critical hit tables in here. They are for permanent damage. Again, it's a heroic sword and sorcery thing, so you can have your warrior walk in there and take some hits or inflict some hits, and they're based on each weapon type. You've got rules for overland exploration, which were not in Quantum Starfarer, but you're more apt to get lost in the desert or have to traverse strange and unusual environments in a sword and sorcery thing without just hopping in your ship and then just flying where you need to. So that's more in-depth. You've got camping and foraging rules, as well as rules for underground movement, for dungeon crawling, of course, and light and darkness. The beautiful thing about this is that since it is vaguely compatible with Quantum Starfarer, there might be some specific differences, but by and large, the skills are the same. The equipment's got the same sort of adjustments and such. If your characters land on a asteroid or something in Quantum Starfarer and want to explore the tunnels within it, or on an alien planet, you can easily bust out the Barbaric rules for that sort of thing if you absolutely had to. You've got rules for sorcery, which is a sort of dangerous sorcery kind of thing. This is a stripped-down version of the rules that are in Sword of Cepheus, which I could have sworn that I reviewed, but it turns out that I didn't, so expect a review on that pretty soon. It's weird because it uses a sort of dangerous spellcasting, complete with mishaps and variable results, that sort of thing, with a very limited spell set in this particular thing. But some of these spells are based on D&D spells, so it's kind of a mixed bag in that regard. But you've got a relatively beefy spell section for such a small role-playing game. But they are, as you can see, very much old-school style descriptions with barely a line or two on them. Now, you do have a bestiary along with some basic monster rules. Now, you do have a reaction table because, of course, not all monsters are going to immediately react poorly to you. I thought that was a nice touch to the D&D origins of some of these. And some of these monsters are just straight up out of D&D, and some of these are based off of creatures that you might find in any bestiary. But this monster list is very, very D&D inspired. Some of these creatures, like the only real parallel you're going to find is in a D&D based system. You do have some basic NPCs like bandits and peasants and berserkers and such, so not everything you encounter is a monster. Then you do have a treasure system because, of course, sword and sorcery, dungeon crawling, you're going to want your treasure. Very abstract treasure system, but it's got some nice little magic items, some of which are pretty simple, like magic swords and such, but some of them are, again, straight out of D&D, like your flame tongue sword, you got your broom of flying, your ring of spell turning, that staff of wizardry. This is stuff that's just straight out of a D20 system role-playing game. Decanter of endless water, even the names. That's not a complaint, by the way. Familiarity means that if you've got a table of people that are not used to Cepheus Engine, you can pull them down, play this, and they're going to recognize some of these magic items if they haven't recognized the spells. After that, you go into legal information again, and it's got the derivatives, and there you go. Barbaric, actually a pretty good quick dungeon crawling system. I got to admit, it uses the Cepheus Engine, or it uses rather the stripped down version that would eventually become the Quantum Engine. These are very similar in how they're put together. Again, very, very simple classic art in here. Just enough to give you some ideas, but not enough to really clutter it because it is such a small book. Although I believe it is actually a larger book than the other one. Hell, I'd play it. I'd play it more if I were out and about, and I didn't feel like yet another just basic D20 system. So finally, we look at Cepheus Atom. This is another one that uses a very similar system. This one is post-apocalyptic. So again, you've got the D20 versus, or the 2d6 versus difficulty. Again, you've got your skills, although in this one, your skills, there's only 6 of them. You've got combat knowledge, physical, social, survival, and technical. I don't even believe that there's stealth in here, so I would almost say you could just use stealth from one of these books. You also have randomized endurance and lifeblood, which I believe was in Barbaric as well. It wasn't until Quantum Starfarer that they switched to a more point-based system, just basing it off your current points. You do have the ability to start mutated because this is a sort of post-apocalyptic style setting. You've got contamination rules that let you build up various toxins and such and eventually reach different contamination levels. They do result in the character dying if you get too contaminated, but until then you can undergo strange mutations. There is a fatigue status, but other than that, you've got your equipment. They've got your armor, and your armor is based on very abstract levels rather than particular sorts of armor. As in everything, you've got your repeat of your common weapons. This one's got a more improvised sort of weaponry feel. In other words, it has your basic melee weapons as you'd see in Barbaric, but it also has more high-tech weapons, but most of them are improvised or salvaged, so it gives you that sort of feel. Got your general equipment, you got a vehicle list. Again, this is more limited. This is not a spacefaring setting, so you do have vehicles, but they're more limited to sort of what you'd see in Mad Max or Road Warrior, that sort of thing. You've got your personal combat rules, which are kind of halfway between Barbaric and Quantum Starfarer. They look like they've got a little bit, just a little bit of touch of deadliness from the Barbaric system, but you don't have the over-the-top abilities that you saw in Barbaric with all kinds of combat options. You've just got your basic melee attacks, your basic weapon attacks, and there's that. Vehicle combat, again, it uses the chase system where you decide who's got, basically who's got advantage and who doesn't. So you roll on the system to determine the effects, but again, these effects are very, very abstract. They just tell you what to do on a particular hit. Again, hitting the crew just applies damage to all of the crew. Hitting a power plant knocks the vehicle out, that sort of thing. Very abstract, very simple to use in quick vehicle combat. You do have repair rules, since you're more likely to repair vehicles in a post-apocalyptic world simply because you were not going to have the ability to go out and go to your spaceport to get them properly repaired or things like that. You do have exploration rules, again, more like Barbaric, since you're stuck on one planet and it's full of very dangerous circumstances, and a lot of this has to do with hazardous terrain, that sort of thing. You do have camping rules. You do have rules for urban scavenging, which is useful, again, because you're survivors in a post-apocalyptic setting, as well as foraging. You've got unusual weather because of the blasted nature of the world, as well as rules for contaminated zones if you walk into an area with high radiation, that sort of thing. Underground movement. You've got basic rules for underground movement in this one. Again, similar to Barbaric, because you're going to be crawling in sewers or in ancient bunkers, that sort of thing, as well as light and darkness rules. You do have sections on the contamination and mutations, so you can accrue mutations over time. And some of them can be major, and some of them can be medium, and they've got all sorts of lists for this sort of thing, and it's beautiful to see. You can eventually become pretty different as a character if you manage to keep your contamination levels in a moderate sort of range. And you do have your encounter and monster rules, similar to Barbaric, as well as example monsters. And it departs from the D&D style monsters that you saw in Barbaric, and you see more post-apocalyptic kind of things like giant roaches, giant ants, weird land sharks, that sort of thing. I think it's a little bit more creative in that way, but at the same time, you're gonna want to be able to describe these things, and they do have them listed, I believe. These are humanoid encounters because there are assumed to be different mutant species out there, so these are based on terrain. It is helpful enough. Robot encounters, again, it is not strictly. I guess it is I guess post-apocalyptic is a sci-fi kind of thing, but this is going to assume a near future rather than a distant future. I'm actually impressed with the robot rules that are in here, and they're not, I believe, in Quantum Starfarer, because it gives you more options that way. And again, this is some rules that if you're playing Quantum Starfarer, you may want to pick up Cepheus Atom as well, just to see if you can use stripped down robot rules in there. You know, it's neat enough in that particular thing. You've got relics, which are basically ancient, or maybe not so ancient, maybe just pre-war style advanced material. And then you've got some weird results for if you find like a particular scientific device that you don't know how to work. So some of them are pretty straightforward, like armor from like a pre-war era, like big power armor suits like you'd see in Fallout or something like that. Some of them are just weird. And then it closes out with your standard legal information. Again, well edited, very basic line art that you see, very basic black and white art that you see. So a little bit more in terms of clip art in this one, but it's very, very lightly illustrated, just enough to give you a sense of things. So all of these three are, I want to say, they're just quick pick up and go things. They do the job remarkably well. They're easy to understand, and if you've played one, then you're probably going to be familiar with all of them. I do like how some of the rules can be used in between them all, so if you don't want a full-on Cepheus system, you want just something you can pick up and stick in a backpack real quick and then go off. I think they're pretty good in that regard. You know, if the problem for me is that I appreciate the niche that they're designed for. I really do. And Stellagama has, in my opinion, a relatively decent and consistent track record in terms of producing fairly playable product, competently put together, that's easy to understand, easy to learn, and easy to play with. My only problem with the light books is that I don't go many places. So I'm generally doing a full tabletop thing. So in that regard, I prefer Stellagama's larger offerings like Cepheus Deluxe or Sword of Cepheus. That having been said, if you're the type to travel, if you're the type to prefer the very, very stripped down rules, I would recommend them for what they do. One last point. I had touched on Cepheus Faster than Light, which is another older product of theirs. And where it differs from Quantum Starfarer is that it's a little bit more in line with their Cepheus Light and Cepheus Deluxe products. It's a little bit closer to the Cepheus system at large and goes into some material that's not covered in Quantum Starfarer. As a result, having that much more material in here does make it a little bit more sparse in terms of actual rules. So everything is incredibly compact, and it even though it's very similar to Quantum Starfarer, it just feels like a different iteration of the system, and it feels like it's designed for a different kind of group. With that having been said, I am going to wrap it up here. I will put links to where you can pick these up below. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment, got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.